Beta Upsilon Chi, Bucks, presents Man to Men, the premier audio journal for men who live faithfully and lead courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove. In today's Soul Care Series episode, we welcome back Dr. Greg Wilson. He's a licensed professional counselor, counseling with Soul Care Associates here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He's also an author, and he's the co-host of the Men of Peace podcast. Greg's back today for the first of 4 episodes looking intently at sexual wholeness in every season of a man's life. It's going to be an important journey for us all, and I don't think we could have a better guide. Greg Wilson, welcome back to Man to Men.
Man, it's always great to be with you, Jared.
I love our Soul Care Series episodes. I can't think of more important ones that we could be doing right now.
This is a really important topic, obviously.
Yeah, guys tuning in, we know why we're here. So let's just jump in. We're using some vocabulary for this part of the series, for these 4 episodes, the sexual wholeness. Maybe not everyone's familiar with that term. Could you, Greg, paint a vision or a picture of what is sexual wholeness in a man's life?
That's a great question. So, I mean, when I think of wholeness, we'll start with that word. What I like to think about is just that we holistically kind of understand every side of whatever the topic might be. So in this case, we're modifying it with the word sexual. And so what we want is we do want to look at sex and understand it rightly as a good gift that God has given us. And is also something that can be exploited, something that can be very harmful in certain seasons of life or in certain ways of achieving it. And so that's when I think about wholeness sexually, that's what I think about. It's like understanding both the good and the hard or the difficult or even the bad of the topic and thinking about ways that we can engage it in ways that are glorifying to God.
Yeah, and I think that's so important to our conversation too, is that sometimes these conversations can feel like they're a beat down or a guilt trip, but sex is a really great gift from God. It's an amazing gift from God, something to be celebrated, and but it can also become idolatry. I know in the circles we've run in for a long time, even just teaching cohorts in places where we've been, we know that idolatry is usually a good gift of God made an ultimate thing and
that's
put
right
in place above God. And we can do that with our sexual lives all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And my guess, Jared, just to tag on to that, is that a lot of the listeners probably have grown up in or have had some kind of exposure to what we might call purity culture, like in the 90s. Some may be too young for that, but even the legacy that has left, the idea that, which is a good and right idea and is not wrong at all, the idea that if you save yourself for marriage, that then God has this good and beautiful gift of sex. Now, that's not wrong. However, a lot of times the way that gets heard, especially like I was a youth pastor in the 90s, the way that gets heard in a lot of teenage brains, even college-age students' minds is, okay, there's this thing I really, really want to do. God says I'm not supposed to do it yet, but when I get that wife, I will just be able to go crazy and do that. And unfortunately, what doesn't get taught to young men sometimes, and it goes back to that idea of sexual wholeness, of seeing like the whole picture rightly, is that just to be blunt, some of the girls in that student ministry or that college ministry are at that same time being sexually abused, sexually exploited, hurt. And if one of those boys who was thinking, I just need to, abstain and hold myself, until marriage with this young lady, then I'll be able to get everything that I want. She's coming in very broken, with very tarnished now ideas about what sex is, about what intimacy is. And that makes it so he wasn't anticipating that, right? When he was thinking, if I just save myself, he wasn't anticipating that sex may be painful for her, particularly if she is abstained as well. So she actually doesn't know how that's going to affect her. It may be very painful for her. It may be hurtful if she has had her own missteps with sexual sin in the past. If he has had his, which I know we'll dig into a little bit more later here. All of that comes into a pot, a stew, if
Yes.
you will, that youth pastor, when he was saying, just save yourselves until marriage, it's going to be so great. He wasn't necessarily anticipating all of that. So this is a multidimensional, multifaceted topic, which again goes to that idea of wholeness.
It does. I'm so glad you brought that to the fore. One reason I think that you're a great guide on this, Greg, and we've talked about this for years, and you have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of men of every age. This is something that you specialize in as a licensed professional counselor. You see a lot of young men, and I know if you're seeing young men, really, if you're seeing any man, which is why we're doing this series, but particularly today we're talking about young men. If you're seeing any young man, you know that this is a part of just something that he's dealing with.
Yeah.
This is a part of how he's made. So I wanted to start out and just ask, what I think the top 2 or 3 questions that young men, particularly high school, college, 20-somethings, what are they asking you, or what's coming up in the counseling room around sex and sexuality?
That's good. Well, hot take, Jared, I really think that they ought to be asking more questions than they are. A lot of times, even going back to our previous pod episode that we did on here on AI, I think a lot of times they're getting that information from ChatGPT, Google, social media influencers, more than older men, mentors, or real life counselors. Here's how it's going to come up in the counseling room. The way it's going to come up in the counseling room is a guy who has, for the most part, has already gone further than they wanted to go down the sexual road, so to speak. Whether that is they are looking at pornography and they're struggling with how to stop, whether that is that they have made some kind of a mistake, with someone, and now they are wanting, to go back to, to where they were. So a lot of times the questions come up in terms of like, how can I, like I feel like I already am addicted to pornography potentially, or I feel like I already have gone too far. Or sometimes it comes up like, isn't this supposed to be something that like, this is, God has given, me these impulses and these desires, and her these impulses and these desires. What's really wrong with it? So sometimes that comes up. But really it tends to, when it comes up like that, I think it's coming up, at least in my counseling office, I think it's coming up as sort of a rationalization for like, I've already gone this far and now I'm like trying to it's not really like trying to make sense of it before the fact. So if I could just do a plug, I know you didn't ask me about this, but just guys are not going to ask a counselor the kinds of questions that they need to be asking. They're going to be asking parents, if they think that parents are open to having those kinds of conversations, youth pastors, college pastors, mentors. So men, and I know that this is the heartbeat of Bucks, which is part of the reason I want to say it here. Like, if you're in Bucks, you already have begun to build the kind of, or are beginning to build the kind of community where you can go to coffee with a guy and just ask these questions. And I think that's where, hopefully with an older guy, a guy who's a little further down the road. But I would encourage parents, if there are any parents listening out there, I know that there are people from all age groups listening. If there are some dads listening out there, perhaps get the God's Design for Marriage set of books. So it's a set of books. You can buy them on Amazon. The set is called God's Designed for Marriage. It's by Stan Jones and his wife. Stan was may still be like a provost or something at Wheaton. He was a psychology professor at Wheaton before that. But he and his wife wrote these really helpful set of books that I know so many people have benefited from. There's a book for the parents. There's stuff for the kids, and stuff for the kids at all age groups. So like, preschool, school age, middle school age, kind of, like get started in that series of books and just have an open conversation with your kids, because they're not going to ask the questions they need to be asking. They're not going to ask me. They're going to end up asking me the questions that follow after they've messed up in some way, if that makes sense.
No, that's really good. Thanks for I'm glad you made the plug. We want good resources, right? That's part of what helps us.
Amen. Amen.
Well, man, let's go there, because I think that, especially sitting with young men, as you and I do week in and week out, I can't remember the last time where I sat with a younger brother who could imagine life without pornography or masturbation.
Yeah.
They'll tell me they were exposed to it at 6 years old, 12 years old. It's something that's always been there, always available. So going there, what are you seeing in your counseling practice around its impact on young Christian men today? These are brothers who are walking with the Lord.
For sure. Well, it's devastating. The impact is devastating on so many fronts. For one thing, it can psychologically in the brain and in the heart, it can foster callousness, increasing acceptance of things that God has said we shouldn't be doing, or we shouldn't be doing at least now, extreme sexual content, those kinds of things, which then that's sometimes that callousness and that desensitization to those kinds of things, especially for a Christian young man, can bring up increased anxiety and depression and stress and loneliness. And then the masturbation, if that's a part of it, usually is, releases these pleasurable brain chemicals that we, think of, dopamine and so forth, and can create a scenario. Often does. Well, it will create. I'll just put it like that. A scenario where, like, anytime I'm down or depressed or anxious or whatever, I know that I can get this this drug, this brain chemical released in my brain that's going to make me feel better. Mm-hmm. And so what ends up happening is the kind of vicious cycle that we see that you and I talked about. We talked about our addiction podcast, which again might be something for someone to go back and listen to in terms of that. But the same cycle of like, I feel bad, I need something, so I'm going to go to this thing which is reliable that produces that dopamine and norepinephrine and serotonin and all those wonderful neurochemicals. But then I'm going to feel shame, and then that's going to make me also, feel bad, and then want to, do something else. And either that something else ends up becoming the same pornography, masturbation regimen, or even worse, it leads to now I'm like going to what I said earlier as far as like more extreme sexual behavior. I'm looking for more extreme kinds of forms of pornography in order to get that same high, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, it just seems so prevalent. So, I mean, Greg, if we're sitting with you and I'm saying, I want to stop, but I can't, where would I even begin?
Yeah. So first of all, there is hope. So I know that what I just said.
So important. Yeah.
Right. So important. What I just said can lead to a sense of hopelessness. There is hope. But you do have to, what's going to be necessary, and what I tell, and the other thing, I'm interrupting myself. I'll come back to where I was.
Yeah.
But like, right. But in talking to young men, especially, I am always, because I also, as you know, and we'll talk about this when we progress through this series, I've also got 30 or 40 or 50 or 60-year-old men in my office who are saying, I want to stop, but I can't. And those guys are tearfully often saying, man, Greg, I've been doing this for 30, 40 years. Like, and it feels so insurmountable to them at that point. And so one of the things that I tell young men is, hey, you are here at the right time. You have come to this realization at a time when there is still so much that you can do. Now, obviously, I'm going to tell the older men there's a lot of things that you can do as well. But that 30, just like when we talked about the addiction, on the addiction podcast that we did, I mean, the longer you've been doing it, the harder it is to stop, for sure, anything. And so one of the things is, I'm going to give a lot of hope. I'm going to say, you're here at the right time. You're asking the right questions now. There is hope. And then it becomes a matter of like understanding actually what's going on in your brain chemistry, and also understanding the ways that this young man may or may not be thinking about sex in a holistically helpful way. So maybe they've been exposed to just years going back to like elementary school of boys talking on the playground or boys talking in the locker room, or whatever, about the things that happen where they end up saying, I'm going to be left out. I'm going to be the only guy that doesn't have this kind of thing. Almost like the precursor to what we see today in terms of incel culture online. The idea that like I'm involuntarily celibate and I'm always going to be that way, right? So that's a lie, obviously, from the pit of hell. It's not true, but but guys are believing those kinds of things. And again, social media and conversations with friends fuel that. So one of the things I'm going to say is, I think you need accountability really right away. Like you need good accountability. And here's what accountability looks like. I'm glad you asked. I know that's one of the questions you would have asked if you had gotten there.
Well, and it's such a loaded word, because I think for any of us who've been around the block once or twice with accountability, we've just got mixed feelings on it at best.
What I've noticed is that a lot of times what passes for accountability in men is, and I'll stick with young men. So since that's the topic that we're dealing with. So the young man goes to his student ministry, and they have groups that they break into groups, and they're, holding each other accountable, so they're like confessing sin. It becomes a confession club in which they will say, hey, I stumbled. So one of the things right off the bat, Jared, is I don't allow guys in our counseling to use those kinds of euphemisms for sexual sin. I stumbled, I fell. Sometimes if I've got a good relationship with the young man, I might even be a little snarky and say, oh my goodness, did you hurt your knee? Like what happened when you fell? Like, oh no, I didn't, you know what I mean, Greg. I didn't fall. Like, I do know what you mean.
Yeah.
But
say
like
what you mean.
Say what you mean. What you mean is that I chose to look at pornography and then masturbate to that. I just think it's so helpful. Like, so accountability properly understood would have that. It's like, oh, you fell, or you like chose to look at pornography. Again, we're not trying to like nail you to the wall. But it's important, like what actually happened here. And then, so yeah, you're right. I chose to look at pornography. Okay, tell me about the scenario. Well, mom and dad had, gone to bed. Of course, I was also supposed to be in bed, but you know how guys do. We were, on our phones, chatting and texting with people late into the night or whatever. And then after that, it was late. I was tired. And, I just got on my computer and started looking at pornography. One thing led to another, or whatever the story is. So then accountability is like, okay, we'll call this guy Jake. Jake, how about um, starting tonight, you just like don't have your device in your bedroom after a certain time. Like when you go to bed, you really actually go to bed. And if you can't sleep, you have a book by your bed that you read, that's going to help you to sleep better anyway. That's what I'm going to tell them as a counselor. It's like, yeah, it's good sleep hygiene to not be looking at a device late at night. So he says, okay, I'll do that. So then the next week when he comes, hey, Jake, how'd you do? Well, I stumbled again. Whoops. What'd you say? What'd you mean? I chose to sin again.
Yeah.
And well, tell me the scenario. Well, I was in bed with my phone late at night. What did we say about that last week, Jake? And again, it's not meant to be, here's the thing. And this, I know this, a lot of the men listening know this. It either becomes this kind of self-righteous thing on the part of the accountability partner of like, I can't believe you did that. Are you serious about the Lord and your faith or
It's not
not?
helpful.
Becomes this like judgmental kind of thing, which that's not what we're talking about.
No, that's not hope.
Right. But we also don't want it to be this like, oh, okay, thank you for confessing that, and, I'll pray for you and hope it goes better next time. Praying is good, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to go better next time unless there's a plan. And the whole idea of accountability is that, if there is a plan, that someone is holding you accountable for that plan.
Mm-hmm. No, it sometimes feels too, like even with that suggestion, because I've made it to other men of all ages as well. It feels like I am paraphrasing somehow Jesus's words. It's like, if you sin, turn off your iPhone or throw it out the window. Like that's what it feels like. It's like that feels worse than cutting off a hand. And yet it does take that kind of, I would say, management or modification to begin a road to healing. But we're talking about wholeness. And so if behavior management is part of it, but not the whole part.
That's right.
What can sexual wholeness actually look like for, now just thinking about guys in their, high school guys, this would be true too, but also collegiates, young professionals. I was one of those, you were one of those. We were young men who had graduated. We were out on our own, probably had roommates, probably had an apartment. What does sexual wholeness look like for a young man who's single trying to honor Christ? Can you just paint a picture of what that could look like?
Oh, I'd love to. So I think in the first place, I think it thinks more broadly about like making sure that we're not glorifying the gift, i.e. sex, but we're about glorifying the giver of that gift, right? In all the ways. And so, yes, sex is a gift. So are genuine male friendships. That's also a gift. So are females, like friendships with females or with the opposite sex that are also just friendships. And so I think rightly understanding things like the fact that we're all created in the image of God. And so all of these people, so a lot of times in school settings, in college class settings, in party settings, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean like a positive,
social.
A positive social get together. Sometimes for young single people, I won't even just say men, could be women as well. For young single people, the other sex is more glorified for like how they look. We objectify sometimes them. We think more about looks than we do about internal things. The heart, again, it's a very common thing. And so I think having a right view of people, a right anthropology, if I could put it that way,
well put.
biblical anthropology, would be such a good start, because that keeps us grounded and tethered to, okay, yes, at some point I may get married, and she will be someone that I see as beautiful, because I probably wouldn't have married her if I didn't see her as beautiful. If I didn't see her as beautiful,
Right, man,
and
we
hopefully,
used to talk about it in premarital all the time. It's like, you do need to be attracted to one another.
sure,
It's like
right,
physical attraction
100%.
needs to be there.
Yeah,
It's a good
you're
thing.
attracted. But even there, the question becomes like, what all am I attracted to? Am I attracted to this person's good looks? Okay, that's great. Like, that is part of it. Hopefully, you're also attracted to some other things as well. You're attracted to the fact that she loves the Lord. You're attracted to the fact that she's got, a lovely family situation that you've gotten to know, that she's got good friends that are also your good friends, that she enjoys the same kinds of things that you enjoy. And all of that becomes the soup of attraction, not just the one narrow element of sex. Because what happens in the counseling room when that has been the main driver, and a lot of times for men and young men, boys and men in particular, is it can become a bigger driver, a driver that supersedes. I mean, a young man listening, and forgive me, listener, if this isn't you, then I'm not talking about you, but there are certainly probably a lot of people listening who are thinking, yeah, Greg and Jared, I get that. She loves the Lord. But she's beautiful, guys. Like, she is so, and like, that's the situation where I'm going to push back and go, I want you to make sure that, like, her external beauty and what you find physically appealing about her is not the only thing that you're attracted to, not even the main thing that you're attracted to. Because again, what's going to happen when they get married and they show up in my office for marriage counseling, the conversation at some point is very likely to turn to things like what counselors call desire discrepancy. I want it 4 times a week, and he wants it, or she wants it 4 times a month, or whatever, whatever that it is. And that happens or at least the real angst around that happens when, like, that was the main driver of attraction. It's like, where that would be the person who said, yeah, guys, I get it. I get it. I'm with you. Like, she loves the Lord and she's got good community, but she's drop dead gorgeous. She's a fox, whatever the language is, right? It's like, yeah, that part, that if that remains the main source of attraction, that is not going to bode well for you post singleness.
Right.
And in singleness. So just for the listeners' knowledge, I think you know this about me, Jared, but my wife and I, we got married when we were 35. So I'm one of those people who stayed single a lot longer than, some other people do.
Yeah.
And it does become more difficult to stay sexually pure. By the grace of God, I did until I was married to my wife. But it is by the grace of God. I mean, it becomes a much more difficult thing to do as you get older, as you see other people. This is another thing that happens in that young 20s kind of season of life. I don't know where we're cutting off this particular season, but where you begin to see friends pairing up.
Yes.
And you haven't kind of found your person yet.
Mm-hmm. It's very real.
Yeah. And then that also is a place where sometimes men begin to turn to sexually immoral behavior, just because they're like, well, I need to do something, or at least I need to be able to be in conversation with these men who are already married and already doing that kind of thing. At least I need to know what that experience is like, so we can continue to talk and have conversations. Otherwise, what do we have in common? And again, my push would be, well, I hope you've got a lot in common besides that, because
Right.
that's, you know,
Right.
so again, when we talk about wholeness, that's the picture I'm trying to create. Is it's more about loving people for who God created them to be, and loving the gift of sex for what God created it to be, and not making anything, including the gift of sex, bigger than God created it to be.
That's good. That's really good. If I may ask, Greg, any advice for our single brothers who are navigating that space? Maybe they feel called to singleness. That is a gift God's given them. I have found that that's very rare, but that's a great gift. Um, but for the guys who are single at the moment, but do desire to be married one day, just like you, any advice for that stage of life?
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast on that.
We could, and maybe we
Yeah,
should. We'll tease it right here.
yeah, that's right. But I think what I would say is, again, don't put the relationship don't make the relationship piece bigger than it is supposed to be in your life. I would say that for everybody, whether they're married or not. Don't make that the ultimate thing. So if you don't have that right now, it's fine to put yourself in places where, like, you might meet someone. I mean, that's helpful to do. I know these days a lot of people do that on, apps and things like that. And I know that there are Christian apps for that. If you're a listener, I'm a 62-year-old guy, so I respect that. And I know some people who have met that way who have had wonderful marriages, but I'm still going to say, meeting somebody, at the church social, if that kind of a thing exists or whatever, is still going to be my preferred, thing. But also, like, look at it. I mean, I think about what Paul said when he said, I wish that, you were all like me, talking about how, he was single, and he wasn't tied down, and he could give himself over to ministry. So, my wife and I would both say that we did a lot of deep ministry during that time. And I know that might sound like, if you're a guy who's like ready to be, married and settle down and start having kids, hey, I understand that. I was there too. So it wasn't where I wanted to be, but it was where God had me. And I got to a place after a while of just being content with, this is the place God has me. I'm not going to waste my single years. I'm not going to, I'm not going to just spend my time in focus and effort towards that. But I'm also going to say, okay, in this season, the Lord has given me this time. What's the best use of it? And so I tried to deploy it for ministry, for personal growth, for grad school. Happened during that time for me. So I just tried to use it for that in that season. I think that's what I would encourage men to do, is like, use in every season of life and in every time of life that the Lord has given you, use that time for the glory of God in whatever way you can. And while still praying, hey, Lord, this is something I really, really want.
Yeah.
I really want this. I am praying towards that end. I am getting out there and meeting people as much as I can towards that end. But in the meantime, what do you have for me to do in this season?
Yeah. Oh, that's really good. If I can change lanes a little bit, but still on the topic, what would you say to a guy who's already been crossing the line physically? Particularly, I'm thinking about men I've sat with just in the last few weeks, who they would say, "Hey, yeah, me and my girlfriend, we're doing everything but," which is very interesting.
Right.
Like, that's still sexual sin, guys. First, we
Right.
have to agree on that. Sometimes we just got to get to that point.
Yes.
But you're talking to me because you know it's not okay. So
That's right.
we're sitting there in that. I know that I messed up physically. Now it's just really difficult whenever we're together, because that's become the thing. So how would you help us in that, Greg, as younger men who are in relationships, pursuing dating, but we've already been crossing some lines.
Right. Well, I would echo what this guy that you're just this hypothetical person that's not completely hypothetical that you're just quoting there. He's
Like
saying
5 or 6 dudes
right,
right now.
exactly.
So, yeah.
That's saying it's become awkward now because like that's become the thing. I would echo that, and I would say, yeah, that's so that is the best diagnosis of where you've gotten yourself now, is that your mindset has become all about that. Her mindset has become all about that. And now it has altered and changed the friendship. And that is what it will continue to do in all different kinds of ways. If you guys get married, which I say if, because maybe at this point you won't, maybe because of the mistakes in the relationship and how things have gone and the awkwardness of it, the relationship just kind of ends. But if it continues and you end up getting married, or if you get married to someone else, that's what too great of an emphasis on sex is going to do, or on anything that, again, to your point earlier, is a good gift of God that we have made ultimate, or that we've made an idol. And so I would say, I think it would be a good idea to like dial some things back. I think it would be a good idea to have a conversation about where would we actually like to be at this point, instead of where we are. Like, where would we like to be, and how could we go back to that? You can do that. You can go back to like, even, I mean, I've met couples who are living together who, say have become convicted about it or whatever. Living together has not been everything that we want it to be, Greg. And now, like, we hate that we're here, but we're here. I mean, are we supposed to go back to having two different places again? I'm like, yeah, I think you can. You can go back to that. And I think that would be helpful. So dialing it back, sometimes even asking the question of like, if you were speaking into younger you, like, so if you now were speaking into yourself before you got to this place, what would you tell yourself? Mm-hmm. Where would you tell yourself to be? What lines would you tell yourself not to cross?
Yeah.
And then like, okay, can you go back and follow your own advice? Can you go back and say, and let this be a redemptive thing for you and your girlfriend, where like, or fiance or whatever, where you guys actually go back and start over in some ways, and just say, yeah, we've tasted that. We liked it in some ways, but we also saw the effect of being there prematurely, and we want to dial some things back. And I would encourage people, you can do that.
No, absolutely. I challenged one guy I was sitting with, I'll just say in the last year. It just came out of me because he was really struggling with this. And I said, man, are you for sure you guys are going to get married? And he goes, well, I think so. I think we'd like to. And I said, okay, well, then don't defile your wife or someone else's.
That's right. Right.
That's what we're dealing with here.
Right. And I think that going back, what you did there, Jared, is so good because, again, it goes back to what I was talking about when I was talking about seeing the other person as an image bearer of God and not objectifying them, like to help each other see. So men listening, to help us all see and understand that these other image bearers that are out there that we may be prone to objectify, that we may be, prone to see as just like a source of pleasure or whatever, they are somebody else's wife, potentially, or future wife. They are somebody's daughter. They are somebody's sister. And sometimes a good question to ask would be if that brother or sister, that sibling of this person, or their dad or mom, or their future spouse knew what was going on here, how would they react to that? Right? Because they would probably see it very differently than you are right now. And we want to get back to seeing, ultimately, regardless of the situation, we want to go back to seeing every human being as being an image bearer of God and treating them the way our Lord would. And so that will dictate, I think, a lot of like where you go if you see this. Same with pornography. If you can look into the screen and see this person on this screen is not just, you know, I don't
An
know,
object.
an object, yeah,
Yeah.
but a human being.
Yeah.
And again, somebody's little girl, somebody's sibling, somebody's really good friend, someone's spouse or future spouse. I think that'll make a big difference in the way that we look at it.
Two things come to mind as you're talking, and they're both commands. Consider one another more highly than yourself.
That's right. Philippians 2.
And
4.
yeah. And consider older women mothers and
Yeah.
younger women sisters.
Yeah.
Like those are commands.
Right.
So those are helpful. And that's where I want to take our conversation here is that what are spiritual practices or maybe disciplines that can actually help in sexual wholeness in the young man? I've got one that I think was really, really helpful for me, but I want to hear some of what you're talking about.
Well, tell me yours. I want to know yours.
Matt, fasting was really big for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Fasting was really, really big for me. In that time where, and it's funny, even talking with the guys now, they're like, what do you do when it's just like, it just seizes you? Like, you've got all that energy and there's nowhere for it to go. And I said, some of the things that helped me the most and still do. I mean, I still love fasting. I love it for the relationship with the Lord.
Right. Sure. Sure.
That's where I really began leaning into it because I thought, man, I read Paul's admonition, I beat my body and make it my slave. And physical training is of some use. I think this is one of the some uses. So I remember starting to go into fasting because I said, Lord, I know that this is a part of, a desire that I've got. It's a good desire you've given me as far as my sexuality. But I don't want it to get out of control in the same sense. Like I kind of don't want to become a glutton either. So those two things linked it together for me in the sense that I am as our friend Greg Allison would put, I'm an in-soul, or I am an embodied soul. And that's where I wouldn't have put it that way then, but that really began to help me in those college years, was just learning how to fast. And then honestly too, just starting to think about how do I want to steward my body?
Yeah.
Those things really began to help me.
Well, and I'll play off of the stewarding your body one as a practice that I think is good. I do think it's helpful to understand that our bodies we are embodied souls, as Greg Allison and others would tell us, and that it is important to recognize that our bodies are sometimes telling us, things that we need to pay attention to. And so, for example, when a guy is saying what you were just saying, someone has said to you about like, I'm like all like, ready to go. My
Ravenous. Yeah.
Yes. It's like, okay, what is your body really hungry for? Like, what is it really needing? And honestly, I think a lot of times, especially if we're like, not looking at the opposite sex as objects, but if we're looking at them as image bearers of God, I think a lot of times the answer is not going to be lovemaking often. I think a lot of times the answer is going to be something a lot more primitive, like dopamine or whatever, And so it's like, okay, great. Understand that, like, and especially to our brothers out there, we also did a pod on neurodiversity. So I'm weaving all this in together. But like,
because we are holistic creatures.
That's right.
That's
That's
great.
right. But for those of you who have ADHD diagnoses, for example, you already have a dopamine deficiency going on. And so to recognize, okay, what I really need is dopamine. I don't really need sex. I just need dopamine. So what's going to give me dopamine? Well, a run might give me dopamine. A long bike ride might give me dopamine. A swim might give me dopamine. All kinds of physical things. Like going and hanging out with other people in a social setting. It wouldn't for me or you because we're introverts, but for some people,
I
that
mean,
would be.
maybe with people we're close to.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. That's right. Um, but um, but that might be a thing. So it's like having a list of things that help me to get that dopamine hit that I need, apart from sex, pornography, masturbation would be really helpful.
Yeah. What role do personal rhythms play in a man's sexual wholeness? We've touched on it a little bit here, whereas sometimes we get into habits where we just make it easier for us to fall into temptation or whatever. But what role do rhythms play?
Well, here's the thing. We know from the great Puritan Thomas Chalmers that if you pursue a greater affection, it will drive out lesser affections. And so that's not the exact title of his sermon, but I can't remember what it is. But that was the idea. And it is true. Like so. If you're prioritizing prayer and devotional life and time in the Word, you're going to be far less likely to sin against God because you're going to be in a mindset of like wanting to glorify God and honor Him. Much more so if you're walking in the Spirit, like if you're actually like walking in a Spirit-filled way. I don't mean that. You know what I mean. I don't mean that in any kind of weird way.
Keeping in step is what Paul
Keeping
would
in
tell us.
step with
Yeah.
the Spirit, you're going to be less likely to sin. If you're consistent in reading the Word, then you will you'll be less likely. So I think, and honestly, just having rhythms, just having dedicated rhythms of life. So a kind of a structure to your life where like I get up in the morning. These are the things I do in the morning. These are the things I do in the afternoon. This is what I do in the evenings. Not to be a slave to it, but to have a bit more structure. Again, if we have people that are neurodiverse listening, particularly for you, but really for everybody, like I do think that makes a big difference.
Yeah. No, that's really good. That's good. As we wrap up this discussion for younger men, Greg, and begin to lay the groundwork for the march into middle age, which is where we'll be next time.
That's right.
How what do you think Jesus wants to say to a guy who is sitting in your office and is saying, I need help?
Such a great question. I often try to channel what I think Jesus is trying to say. So I think a lot of it would be some things I've already said. So maybe I'll just, you know,
Yeah, we need reminders.
reprise some of those things. So things like, he definitely wants them to know that I love you, that I see you, that I know the human struggle is real because I lived it. And that's part of the reason that I lived it. And even though it's hard to understand how this is Jesus talking, me being fully God and fully man, would have fully experienced the human condition, that may be hard for you to understand. But I need for you to know that I did fully experience the human condition. And so I do know what it's like to be you. And I love you and I see you in this, and there is hope. You do not have to, if you have made some mistakes, if you have sinned in some ways that you're embarrassed about or feel shamed about or whatever, I have taken your shame on the cross. And I want you to know that there is hope for change and hope for redemption, and if a relationship has been harmed because of this, even reconciliation. And so I think that's the main thing. And then I think you also would want them to know, getting serious about sin. Jesus might say something like this. Jesus might say, I preached a sermon one time. It was on a mount, as I recall. And in that sermon, I said, if your arm causes you to sin, I need you to cut that thing off. And if your eye causes you to stumble or sin, I need you to gouge that thing out. Now can I tell you what I mean by that? Because I was not advocating in that Sermon on the Mount, I was not advocating self-mutilation. But here's what I was advocating. If you're taking your sin seriously, then again, if that phone is causing you to stumble, maybe you need a flip phone instead of a smartphone. Or maybe you don't need that smartphone anytime you are alone and unaccountable. You just need to put it somewhere else, like at night, for example. Maybe those are the kinds of extreme actions that you need to take. Maybe the thing that you've been embarrassed to tell mom or dad or this mentor that you have, maybe you need to just go ahead and tell that thing, because freedom is going to come in confession and in light and in truth. I think those would be the main things he would want them to know.
It's wonderful. No, it's fun to practice on one another, which is have the mind of Christ together. That's how right. You just led us in that time.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. It's good.
Great before you, Greg. We're going to pick up the conversation in our next episode, guys, looking at how sexual wholeness follows us into that next stage of a man's life. We'll be back with Greg then. Greg, thanks. We'll talk to you soon.
I'll look forward to it.
Man to Men is powered by Beta Upsilon Chi, commonly referred to as Bucks. Everywhere, every day, Bucks men are raising families, leading in organizations, and strengthening our churches to impact our communities for Christ. To find out more about Beta Upsilon Chi, you can transliterate our Greek letters and add.org. That's byx.org. We are produced, rather well, I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. For Beta Upsilon Chi, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.